Hello, my name is Mary Catherine Smith, and I would love to share with you a little bit about EMDR. Eye movement desensitization and reprocessing is an integrative psychotherapy approach for the treatment of trauma guided by the adaptive information processing model. Clients are first asked to visualize the traumatic event as vividly as possible. While holding this image in their mind, they are told to supply a statement that epitomizes their reaction to it, like, "I'm about to die," or clients are then asked to rate their anxiety. In addition, they're told to provide a competing positive statement that epitomizes their desired reaction to the image, like, "I can make it," and then to rate their degree of belief in this statement. Following these initial steps, clients are asked to visually track the therapist's fingers as it sweeps rhythmically from left to right in sets of 12 to 24 strokes. The finger motion is carried out for 12 to 14 seconds in front of the client's eyes. Following each set, the clients are asked to blank out the visual image and inhale deeply. And then they're asked to rate their anxiety and their belief in their positive statement again. All right, so the history and founder of EMDR. Dr. Francine Shapiro, while in 1979, she was working as an English teacher and completing her PhD in English literature, and when she was diagnosed with cancer. She'd completed all but her dissertation at this point, but due to her experience with illness, her study shifted from literature to stress management. One day during this period, she was walking through the park and she began experiencing distressing memories. She watched a squirrel run from side to side across the walk and noticed her eye movements decreased the negative emotion associated with her memories. She took this theory and ran with it. In 1989, she continued to study this effect and used it to form her dissertation for her PhD in psychology. She added treatment elements such as a cognitive component and conducted a controlled treatment outcome study, which was later published in the Journal of Traumatic Stress. So from that point on, EMDR was absolutely huge, and she went on to found the EMDR Institute. So EMDR, as an integrative psychotherapy approach, it is compatible with almost every contemporary paradigm. So it's compatible with psychodynamic, cognitive behavioral, experiential, and systemic, as well as many others. So it's really appealing to social workers in that way, since we come, from such eclectic theories. There are two components which are used over 8 phases in order to explore past experiences and present triggers and then create future templates. The first is the adaptive information processing model, and the second is bilateral stimulation. The adaptive information processing model basically takes a traumatic memory that is not processed in the amygdala, which is part of the brain responsible for the emotional hashtags that go along with our memories. It takes that traumatic memory because in traumatic memories, the amygdala gets overwhelmed, so the hashtags get all mixed up. They're not able to store emotional tags properly. It takes that and then partners with the hippocampus, which is like the librarian of your brain. So when the hippocampus gets these memories, which don't have hashtags, it freezes up. And this dysfunction leads to characteristics of PTSD, like intrusive thoughts or nightmares. And the result, PTSD is basically the result of unprocessed emotional content. In EMDR, the client is instructed to focus on both a disturbing image or a memory and on an emotion and cognitive elements connected to it. Once the client has established contact with the disturbing material, the therapist induces bilateral stimulation. So bilateral stimulation, the simplest method for doing it involves moving the fingers back and forth in front of the client's face, like this. And after instructing the client to follow the movement with his or her eyes, bilateral stimulation could also be induced through auditory or tactile stimuli, like tapping through headphones with sounds going in each ear, or even using like a buzzing mechanism in each hand. EMDR develops the internal resources and coping skills so that you can process the trauma, basically through guided desensitization of the emotional overload, and then reprocessing the traumatic memories. So you're developing new meanings or hashtags and filing those memories accordingly. Okay, so we're going to go through all 8 phases of protocol so that you get an overview of what the whole model entails. So phase 1. This phase generally takes 1 to 2 sessions, but may continue throughout the therapy, especially if new problems are revealed. In the first phase of EMDR treatment, the therapist takes a thorough history of the client and develops a treatment plan. This phase will include a discussion of the specific problem, behaviors, and symptoms that brought the client into therapy. With this information, the therapist will develop a treatment plan that defines the specific targets or memories on which to use EMDR. The targets include the events from the past that created the problem, the present situations that are causing distress, and then key skills or behaviors the client needs to learn for future well-being. One of the unusual features of EMDR is that the person seeking treatment does not have to discuss any of the disturbing memories in detail. So while some individuals are comfortable and even prefer giving specifics, other people may present more of a general picture or an outline. When the therapist asks, for example, "What event do you remember that made you feel worthless and useless?" the person might say, "It was something my brother did to me." And that's all the information the therapist needs to know to identify and target the target event with EMDR. So during this phase, the therapist also screens for readiness for EMDR, and also to make sure the client is a good candidate for the therapy. So we're going to get sidetracked really quick and talk a little bit about populations that benefit from EMDR. So a sign of readiness would be being able to tolerate just the distressing affect associated with unprocessed material. The client must be able to just let whatever happens happen. They must be able to maintain dual attention during processing. So the therapist determines if the client has the ability to maintain a connection to the therapist and to the sensations during the session. The client must be ready to change state, basically to like go to a safe place in your mind, maybe through breathing or other grounding exercises, and then regulate positive and negative affects. The therapist also assesses for adequate internal and external resources. They assess for dissociative disorders and for psychosis. They determine also the level of crisis that the client is in, if they're a danger to themselves or others. So you're a good candidate for EMDR if you've basically experienced a trauma or that you're having anxiety that impairs your daily life. It could be you've experienced a natural disaster or a childhood trauma. It could just be memories that are disturbing to you. EMDR is not really for those who have experienced multiple or lifelong traumas. All right, so phase 2. For most clients, this will only take 1 to 4 sessions. For others with very traumatized backgrounds or with certain diagnoses, a longer time may be necessary. Basically, the clinician will teach you some of the specific grounding techniques so that you can rapidly deal with any emotional disturbance that may arise. If you can do that, you're generally able to proceed to the next phase. One of the primary goals of the preparation phase is to establish a relationship of trust between the client and therapist. That while the person does not have to go into great detail about their disturbing memories, if the EMDR client does not trust the clinician, they may not accurately report what they feel or what changes are or are not being experienced during the eye movements. During the preparation phase, the clinician will also explain the theory of EMDR, how it is done, and then what the person can expect during and after treatment. And then finally, the clinician will teach the client a variety of relaxation or grounding techniques for calming themselves in the face of any emotional disturbance that may arise during or after the session. Okay, phase 3 is used to access each target or memory in a controlled and standardized way so that it can be effectively processed. Processing may or may not mean actually talking about the memory or event. The clinician identifies the aspects of the target to be processed. And the first step is for the person to select a specific picture or scene from the target event, which was identified during that phase 1 period that best represents the memory. I've heard this explained as the client is a passenger on the train, and in their mind, the client travels on this imaginary train to the event, the target, or the trauma. And then they're asked to view it, but they remain safe inside the train. They're just sort of looking at the event through a window. And then they choose a statement that expresses a negative self-belief associated with that event. Even if they intellectually know that the statement is false, it is important to focus on it. So these negative beliefs are actually verbalizations of the disturbing emotions that still exist. An example of cognitive negative or common negative cognitions might be statements like I'm helpless or I'm worthless, I'm unlovable, statements like that. The client then picks a positive statement that they would rather believe. And the statement should incorporate an internal sense of control, like I am worthwhile, I'm lovable, I'm a good person, I'm in control, or I can succeed. Sometimes when the primary emotion is fear, such as in the aftermath of a natural disaster, the negative cognition could be I'm in danger, and the positive cognition could be I'm safe now. The positive cognition should reflect what is actually appropriate in the present. At this point, the therapist will ask the person to estimate how true he feels his positive belief is, using a scale from 1 to 7. It's important to give a score that reflects how the person feels and not how the person thinks. We may logically know that something is wrong, but we are mostly driven by how it feels. Also during the assessment phase, the person identifies negative emotions like fear or anger, and also any physical sensations like tightness in the stomach, cold hands. He associates with the target. The client also rates the level of disturbance using like a 0 indicating no disturbance to 10, the worst feeling you've ever felt. And the scale is called Subjective Units of Disturbance Scale. Okay, phase 4. In this phase, the focus is on the client's disturbing emotions and sensations as they are measured by the subjective units of disturbance rating. This phase deals with all of the person's responses, including other memories, insights, associations that may arise as the target events change and its disturbing elements are resolved. This phase gives the opportunity to identify and resolve similar events that may have occurred and are associated with the target. That way the client can actually surpass their initial goals and heal beyond their expectations. During desensitization, the therapist leads the person in sets of eye movement or other forms of stimulation, the bilateral stimulation, with appropriate shifts and changes to focus until that SUD scale levels are reduced to 0 or 1 or 2 if appropriate. Starting with the main target, the different associations to the memory are followed. So starting with like a bigger level of disturbance to other associations that might be less disturbing. For instance, the person may start with a horrific event and then soon have other associations to it. In phase 5, the installation phase, the goal is to concentrate on the increased strength of the positive belief that the person has identified to replace his original negative belief. For example, the client might begin with a mental image of being beaten up by their father and a negative belief of I am powerless. During the desensitization phase, he will have reprocessed the terror of that childhood event and fully realize that as an adult, he now has the strength and choices he didn't have when he was young. During this 5th phase of treatment, the positive cognition, I am now in control, will be strengthened and installed. And the goal is that for the person to accept the full truth of their positive statements. Before moving on to phase 6. After the positive cognition has been strengthened and installed, the therapist will ask the person to bring the original target event to mind and to see if they notice any residual tension in their body. If so, the physical sensations are then targeted for reprocessing. There are physical responses to unresolved thoughts. And when a person is negatively affected by trauma, information about the traumatic event is stored in body systems memory rather than in narrative memory. And it retains the negative emotions and physical sensations of the original event. So when the information is processed, however, it can then move to a narrative or a verbalized memory, and the body sensations and negative feelings associated will disappear. So therefore, an EMDR session is not considered successful until the client can bring up the original target without feeling any body tension, and then they can move to phase 7. So the closure phase ensures that the person leaves at the end of each session feeling better than at the beginning. If the processing of the traumatic target event is not complete in a single session, the therapist will assist the person in using a variety of self-calming or grounding techniques in order to regain a sense of equilibrium. Throughout the EMDR session, the client has been in control. For instance, if he is instructed that it is okay to raise their hand to stop or gesture at any time. And it is important that the client continues to feel in control outside the therapist's office. During this phase, the client is also debriefed on what to expect between sessions. Some processing may continue, and some new material may arise. And the therapist instructs the client maybe to use a journal to record these experiences, and then also which techniques he might use in order to help himself feel more calm. And the final phase is the reevaluation phase. During this phase, the therapist checks to make sure the positive results have been maintained, and then they identify any new areas that need treatment and continue to reprocessing the additional targets. The reevaluation phase guides the clinician through the treatment plans that are needed in order to deal with the client's problems. As with any form of good therapy, the reevaluation phase is vital in order to determine the success of treatment over time. Although clients may feel a relief almost immediately with EMDR, it is important to complete all 8 phases of treatment, just as it's important to complete an entire course of treatment with antibiotics. Okay, so I've got a YouTube video that we'll sort of put all of these 8 phases together. So I'll put that link up there. And if you want to pause this video and view that and then come back, and we'll talk a little bit about critique and training. All right, so empirical evidence. So Francine Shapiro in 1989 first came up with the control studies investigating the treatment of PTSD, and then that was published. So besides that, there were 3 big studies that came out just after that. The Broom study compared the results of psychodynamic therapy, hypnotherapy, and desensitization, and provided an average of 16 sessions. It found clinically significant treatment effects for 60% of the civilian participants, with no differences between conditions. And then the Cooper and Clem study compared flooding to standard care in a Veterans Administration hospital. And they reported moderate clinical effects after 6 to 14 sessions with a 30% patient dropout rate. And then finally, the Keene study compared flooding to a waitlist control for veteran participants and reported moderate clinical effects after 14 to 16 sessions. So those are the 3 big studies that followed Francine Shapiro's study. Now, there have been tons of studies and meta-analysis completed, which speak to the efficacy of EMDR. So you can go to this website right here, www.emdr.com, and look for efficacy. And it lists all the current research. It's a long line of research articles and meta-analysis proving how effective EMDR is as a therapy model. Training for EMDR is really intense. EMDR therapy basic training consists of 2 weekends and 10 hours of case consultation. The cost for the weekends runs about $1,400 to $1,600 dollars, and the price, if you want to know where the price difference is, it's decreased for early registration and for students or nonprofit workers. It's only offered to those who have a clinical background, and attendance at the workshop is limited to all levels of social workers and mental health professionals who have a master's degree or higher in the mental health field and are licensed or certified through a state or national board which authorizes independent practice. If you want information or are interested in getting trained in EMDR, you can go to this website and it will walk you through it. You can register right there. All right, so critique. There is overwhelming evidence that eye movements are neither necessary nor useful in addition to the procedure. The external stimulus, like whether moving the eyes, tapping on the client, or playing certain tones, is supposed to help the brain reprocess memories and information, and is alleged to be useful for a wide range of psychiatric symptoms. But the proposed mechanism, that bilateral stimulation, is thought by some to be pretty dubious. That while the brain certainly has plasticity, the ability to change its wiring through use, it's kind of hard to imagine how such a simple procedure could have a significant effect on this plasticity. So there are a lot of folks who suspect that the eye movement component to EMDR may be sort of like the equivalent to a needle in acupuncture. Also, there's a strong and consistent evidence that EMDR is better than no treatment, yet only as good as other treatment that utilizes some aspect of exposure therapy. So a lot of people believe that it's really the exposure therapy that works the magic in EMDR. There's strong evidence that full exposure-based interventions package is superior to EMDR, and there's also evidence that reprocessing is likewise superfluous to EMDR, and that the effects of EMDR dissipate over time. So it's concluded that the current debate cannot be entirely settled through scientific investigation due to the rapid and constant reshaping of what constitutes EMDR. The similarity to alternative methods, and then the lack of like theory underpinning the procedure is also something that is concerning. Okay, so but a lot of people say that it's magic, and if you start researching EMDR, you'll hear a lot of stories about how folks were so disabled by the trauma that they had faced, and that those pictures somehow, while riding that train, they were really intense at first, and now they're sort of dull. So it's pretty cool. So here are my references, and then there will be another video uploaded that has an example of my role play. So thank you so much, and have a good night.